Very much for inviting me. I'm usually standing up in these kinds of rooms talking to you about things like student recruitment and budgets, very stern faces. So I'll try not to kind of revert suddenly back, my mind goes blank, into some kind of faculty presentation. And I'm really pleased to have the chance to come and talk about some work. Angela's just nipped back to my office to produce a little object, which will be interesting research for you to look at. So when she comes back in, I'll introduce her. Angela was the researcher with me on an AHRC project that we completed in the summer called Catalyst, it's actually called Jetty, the project. This is Angela now, enter stage left. And so we finished the project in, I think it was the end of June. It was a collaborative project with a fine artist, a sculptor called Wolfgang Wieleder, who works in fine art at the University of Newcastle. And as I'll show in the presentation, Wolfgang have known each other for a few years now, and our relationship's been developing. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that relationship as a way of talking through a little bit about doing collaborative interdisciplinary research and trying to work out what that means and what difference, if any, working collaboratively and interdisciplinary makes. Because that's something I've been doing for a long time in different ways through my career, and I'm still trying to think that through and work out what difference it really makes. So we know it's a good thing to do because you can extract research funding from the research council if you say you're doing it. But what it really means to do it is still, I think, a very much an open question, and a question we're all engaged with. Obviously, it's good to have John here because the development of the new Institute for Social Futures is precise in a way trying to make sense of what that means. So that's what I'm going to tell you the story, and it's certainly, as you'd expect me to say, not a story with an ending. And in fact, this is a very strange kind of project, really. It's the only project I've ever been involved in that we had in the budget money to do a very impressive, certainly in terms of its looks. I'll leave you to judge whether it's impressive any other way. Book, which was included as a budget in the HRC. This is one advantage, straight away I can tell you, of working with a fine artist. Because to reach that kind of community, this is the kind of way you have to reach them if you want to introduce any kind of words. And Wolfgang, I should say, he managed to persuade the HRC that having a healthy budget to produce a book like this was a meaningful thing to do, and we got the money. So it's the first time I've done a project where you're going to complete the book before the end of the project. So while on the one hand, there's an interesting contradiction running through this. While on the one hand, there's a sense of what does this mean? There are multiple meanings, all the usual thing I'm sure everyone in the room is familiar with. At the same time, I'm actually producing a definitive end of project book. So there's some copies here. There's more copies than there are people in the room. If people are moved and are sufficiently interested, you can take a copy of the book with pleasure. One of the great things of working with this publisher as well, we've actually paid zero for it, but we've got given lots of copies of the book to distribute. So the book itself forms part of the catalytical effect, hopefully, of the project by kind of delivering it around. So I can get, if more people want them than's there, I can get some more. So very briefly, I didn't want to spend much time talking about me or my previous work, so I just tried to put up a slide which is I've used in a couple of articles that I've written, The Complex History of Sustainability, because it kind of summarises the space that I've been trying to work in over the whole of my career, really, but working in very different kinds of ways. I have always worked in a very interdisciplinary way, but I've worked with engineers, I've worked with economists, I've worked with fine artists and so on. And all through that work I've been trying to kind of interrogate in different ways this kind of complex history and meanings of sustainability, often in a very kind of urban context. So I've been involved, again, as many of you have, in this whole debate about the socio-technical, more recently kind of understanding assemblage thinking and all of this, trying to understand how sustainability is this very contested terrain which differs fundamentally from the kinds of discourses that you get through policy, which is continually trying to compress down the meaning of sustainability, most recently carbon neutrality, but we're moving on, we're seeing a turn away from that again now, in order to make it amenable in one way to kind of policy processes and particular kinds of technical solutions. So that's the space that I've been working in, primarily in recent years, certainly when I came here to Lancaster a year ago from Manchester, where I went to set up originally 10 years ago now, an architecture research centre which explicitly tried to bring architects together with social scientists. So I've been working for a long time on architecture and trying to understand how architects, who are often positioned in sustainability, people like Richard Rogers, Norman Foster, are supposedly embodying the kind of solution. What does a sustainable city really look like? And it's interesting the way that architects have been so successful, they've edged planners out of the way. So there'll be a debate about kind of transport, and there'll be an architect talking about it. More generally about urban design, the architects have colonised this space very, very powerfully. And I think if you look through the works around sustainable design, sustainable architecture, you see you see expressions of these different materializations, these different visions of what sustainable cities, sustainable futures is about. And of course, one of our colleagues, Nick Dunn in Leica, has been doing some really interesting work about cities of the future in this kind of space as well. So that's the kind of work that I've been doing, and I've got given lots of other presentations and written quite a bit about that. But I want to actually take the opportunity today to talk about this work with Wolfgang. So Wolfgang is a very interesting character. I don't know, we did a little launch this book in Leica, beginning of the summer. Wolfgang came along and gave a talk. So he's, on the one hand, a firmly traditional artist in that he sees what he's about is producing artworks. And so he has works which he sells for quite a lot of money. He exhibits in kind of galleries. He's acutely sensitive in any kind of conversation to his value as an artist, and anything that comes out of any joint activity has to make sense within his kind of community. That's how he kind of builds value. But he has this fascinating relationship with the city and developing artistic practice in relation to the city. And this actually is a product of time-lapse photography, and it's actually a piece of kind of classic, the demolition of a modernist piece of architecture. He's done a whole series of these, in the Simile series using time-lapse photography called Atlas, where he's gone around various kind of mostly urban spaces and used this time-lapse, taking every few minutes a kind of image, and then he's got a specialist piece of software which puts all this information together, produces these kinds of images. So you can read these kind of left to right. Some of them you can read more easily than others. But they're all kind of little meditations on urban space, and in a way, I'm making the leap to the theme of this seminar, and to Seymour, mobility and change and time. So our conversation around his work, and let's just tell you a little bit more about it as well before I get into our relationship. So that's the photography work, which is classic kind of fine art really, and that's him and a camera. But an interesting set of work he's done has been around architecture. So he's done a piece of work called Transfer, a piece of work called House, and a number of these, and there's some works that he's been doing with me that I'm going to tell you a little bit more around. But in terms of the practice, it's very interesting because he takes actual existing kind of buildings as kind of prototypes and produces kind of scale images of these. But then he reproduces them in kind of real time, working with kind of construction students, and here he is actually rehearsing a piece called House, which then, it's not exactly the same piece, but it's in the same series, gets reproduced in certain kinds of urban locations, in public spaces. So there's a kind of immediately, he's trying to create a relationship, create a conversation between architecture and construction in particular spaces, and invite an audience, in which case here is literally a passing kind of audience, into that kind of conversation. Now these produce, as I said, it's important to keep remembering this in terms of the tensions of Wolfgang's work, with an absolutely, I'm using value judgment, calling it conservative, but a kind of fine art kind of discourse, a fine art practice which produces pieces of work. In this sense, this was a video of this process, so again linked to the time-lapse photography, in real time where you can see this construction going on within the real gallery. And he produces beautiful fine art prints which you can buy and put on your wall if you can afford them, of this kind of process as well, and obviously produces catalogues, of which this is a kind of catalogue, I think. And let me give you a little taster of this, given that we've got a generous amount of time at this seminar. So this was House Birmingham. So I'll shut up for a moment and you can watch this.
Is there sound?
There is sound, but I'll wait for me.
Do you want to?
Can you get it anywhere else? I mean, it's not that significant sound, but just one of those kind of new age lenses.